Welcome to Pomegranate Radio with your host, Jonathan Cook.
Good evening, Pomegranate Nation. Jonathan here in the Pomegranate Radio booth. Earlier this evening, I received this email in response to my review of Birdemic. I recently listened to your quote-unquote review of Birdemic, where you mentioned that it's a better movie than God's Not Dead. You need to understand how incredibly offensive that kind of comment is to Christians everywhere. Just because you're one of those liberal intellectual atheists does not mean you can throw around your evil atheist agenda and no one will call you on it simply because you use big words to pretend you're smart. God knows your real heart and he knows the lies you and all the people like you try to spread on the net. Just because you don't have any faith, don't try to hurt those who have accepted God and Jesus Christ into our hearts. I'm not trying to be mean writing this to you, but you have to know how harmful your comments can be. I'll pray for you and hope that God can lead, I assume that's supposed to be you, back to him. And remember, God's not dead, he's surely alive. - a believer. First off, I'm Catholic, not an atheist, and I do not have an evil atheist agenda, whatever that means. Second, I wasn't trying to offend anyone, but I call things like I see them with regards to movies, even religious ones. I personally don't care how you worship, or what you worship, or what you believe, as long as you're not harming anyone else in the process. But I discuss films, and God's Not Dead is a bad film, and that's a sentiment echoed by critics and audiences alike. Metacritic rates this film at 16 based on critical reviews and 3.3 based on audience reviews. That's not just bad, that's overwhelmingly bad. That's flush your head down the toilet bad. Critics, who are traditionally harsher on films than the audiences are, gave this film a better set of ratings than the audiences did. Even some evangelical Christians, nominally the film's target audience, expressed dissatisfaction with the film. Michael Gerson wrote in the Washington Post that the main problem with God's Not Dead is not its cosmology or ethics, but its anthropology. It assumes that human beings are made out of cardboard. Academics are arrogant and cruel. Liberal bloggers are preening and snarky. Unbelievers disbelieve because of personal demons. It is characterization by caricature. Now, I'm sure this is only going to further incense my already offended audience member, along with any number of other people, but here goes. Here are my problems with God's Not Dead, and why I feel it's a bad film. Our protagonist, clean-cut college freshman Josh Wheaton, runs afoul of Dr. Radovich when he refuses to sign a piece of paper stating that God is dead. Josh's girlfriend, who is only at this particular college due to her following Josh there because love, I guess. Anyway, she tells Josh to let it go, but Josh gets some guidance from Reverend Dave, who encourages the boy to argue with his professor regarding the existence of God. Good luck with that. Radovich's girlfriend Mia, meanwhile, has a mother who is dying, who is really only dying for reasons. I don't know. Mia is a Christian, which comes into conflict with her boyfriend's staunch atheism. Mia's brother, Mark, is a successful lawyer, I think, it's never explained, who treats his girlfriend, super ultra mega left-wing blogger Amy, like crap when he learns that Amy has cancer. Amy spends the film crying over her impending death and trying to interview bomb Willie Robertson and the newsboys. There is also a Chinese student named Martin, a classmate of Josh's, who is struggling with becoming a Christian, and a Muslim girl named Aisha who is thrown out of her home by her father for listening to Christian sermons on her iPod. Meanwhile, Reverend Dave and his buddy, Reverend Jude, spend the bulk of the film trying to get a functioning rental car so they can go to Disneyland. Yeah. Let's start with the smaller things. For one, this film has way too many characters and way too many stories, all of which are way too conveniently connected. I'm assuming this was done to pad the running time, but even taking just 2 or 3 of the stories should have been enough material to make a 113-minute film. The problem is that none of the plot lines have anything approaching substance. Every single character is, as Michael Gerson said, a caricature. Amy, the super ultra mega left-wing blogger, is perhaps the most laughable example of this. A woman who earnestly believes that questioning how Robertson dares talk about God on his show and how the newsboys dare sing about God in their songs is a reasonable thing to do. The way she does it just makes a person with any amount of intelligence roll their eyes. She gives liberals everywhere a bad name because people think that's what we're really like. Or consider Aisha, who comes from a traditional Muslim household. It's only traditional if by traditional you mean stereotypical. The father is at first a caring man, if a bit overly conservative, right up until he finds out his daughter has been listening to Christian sermons, at which point he violently drags her out of the house. This is not a Muslim father. This is a maniac who is being portrayed as a Muslim. This is one step away from Germany, 1940. The Jews are coming to eat your babies. Let's kill them before they do. Josh's girlfriend, Kara, exists solely to tell Josh not to debate his professor, to not stand up for his faith. And then she breaks up with him when he does. Seriously. And she disappears after 44 minutes, less than halfway through the film. Just vanishes. Mark, played by Dean Cain, is only in this film because, hey, they hired Dean Cain! He has 3 scenes, if I remember correctly, and is basically just there to be mean to his sister and his mother. Really. Martin, the Chinese kid, has the only story that I kind of halfway liked. His conflict over becoming Christian seemed way more human than anything else in this film. I do think it's sad that the screenwriter chose to make an oblique reference to Chinese politics and Christianity in China, but then didn't bother to follow it up. I guess that would have been like, good screenwriting. Well, we can't have that now, can we? The Reverends Dave and Jude, dear God. Their whole rental car fiasco is simply a plot device to ensure that at the end of the film, Reverend Dave will be there to convert Dr. Radovich as he dies. Really? Really? And if the overly expansive cast of one-dimensional characters playing out a ridiculous set of stories was the only problem, this film could easily be called bad. But it gets worse. I said earlier that Christians are nominally this film's audience, and I said that because I have known many reasonable, level-headed Christians in my time. But this film panders to those who have deep, serious persecution complexes. Everything and everyone in this film who is not a Christian is out to get the Christians. Academia is shown to be nothing but a den of liberal, intellectual atheists. See what I did there? Liberals are nothing more than haters who ask inane questions. Muslims are angry maniacs who beat their children. And girlfriends are just pretty blondes who show too much cleavage and don't understand your mad devotion to God. Sure, all of this makes the storytelling easier, but by taking such a fundamentally lazy road, the film is essentially admitting that it has no faith, zero faith, in the veracity of its message. Considering that stand up for your beliefs has been done to death in secular films, doing it in the context of a religious film should have been a cakewalk. And it was! Except for, making a case and defending the argument. Which brings me to the biggest fault in this film. The debates. The arguments. Dr. Radovich gives Josh 3 opportunities to convince his classmates that God does exist. Now, let's ignore the fact that no college would be stupid enough to permit this to happen. The lawsuit would be filed before class was dismissed. And let's ignore the fact that Radovich is justified in not starting an introductory philosophy course with early religions. Most courses of that nature begin chronologically with the Greeks. But we do need to talk about the question being posed. Does God exist? Radovich says no, Josh says yes. Let Mortal Kombat begin. The problem is that for most of the time devoted to the 3 debates, the question is not really dealt with until the very end. In fact, Josh even admits at the very start that there is no way to prove or disprove the existence of God. This is a fact that Radovich, being, a professor of philosophy, would have known. So why are we watching this argument at all? Just so Radovich can humiliate the poor boy. Because, academics, evil. But the kid does take up the challenge, or at least tries to. In the first debate, Josh argues that because Steven Weinberg, a scientist, claims what happened in the first moments after the Big Bang resembles what he believes would have happened after God said, "Let there be light," the Bible is correct. No, that's not any kind of argument. All that proves is that one event, the creation of the universe, is being described using similar language in 2 different sources. Or rather, that it can be described using similar language in 2 different sources. He goes on to argue that science fails to address the ex nihilo question. Because it does not make sense that the universe came from nothing, what caused that initial explosion? Well, Josh, the Big Bang is generally agreed to have been an explosion of supercondensed material under extreme temperatures. Where that material came from, science is not sure, but one possibility is a previous universe after a big crunch. Read a science textbook, Josh. They have stuff in them. And even if that is not the case, and the universe did come from nothing, science argues that a zero-energy universe, which our universe is widely believed to be, could come from nothing. Radovich, however, doesn't make mention of these things. His rebuttal is almost non-existent. He makes reference to Stephen Hawking's belief in a self-made universe, and Newton's declaration that God is not necessary to creation. Only problem is that whether God is necessary or not was not the question at hand. You should be better at debating than this. Neither is making any kind of substantive argument. Josh is at least making an effort, and asking what caused the Big Bang is fair. But he's leaping way too far ahead by using the absence of a definite scientific answer as proof for God's existence. An absence proves nothing. And all Radovich is doing is saying, "No, you're wrong, move on, next point, idiot." Because, academics, evil. In the second debate, Josh refutes Hawking by citing a case of circular logic, which is fair, although Josh is ignoring, the context in which Hawking made his comment. This does not, however, advance his case, and so he then tries to refute Darwin by demonstrating a feeble, at best, grasp of the science of evolution and claiming that nature, despite what Darwin said, did in fact jump. And then he quotes Genesis. And that's a big problem. When Josh tries to argue logically, his arguments are flawed. Yes, but at least he's playing by the rules. When he begins quoting scripture, however, there is no logical argument to be made. The Bible takes God's existence as a given. It doesn't test the theory, it accepts it as a default position. And then there is the third debate, the debate proper, you might call it, in which Josh grotesquely reduces the problem of evil to an issue of free will, which is technically correct, but he's ignoring a lot of complexity. He then attempts to demonstrate that Radovich would say a student who cheats on a midterm or a final has violated a moral absolute. No. Do not cheat on a test is not now, nor has it ever been, a moral absolute. Not even close. And then for his final argument, Josh asks Radovich why Radovich hates God, to which Radovich admits that he does hate God. And Josh asks how he can hate something that does not exist. Josh relies on a trick to win. He never proves his position, merely tricks his opponent into giving up his position. Consider the argument made. God exists because someone hates him. The writer to that statement is that a person cannot hate something that does not exist. That hatred necessitates the existence of the object of hatred. No, it does not work like that. Many Germans hated the baby-eating Jews, even though the baby-eating Jews did not exist. You can hate something that does not exist. Let's be clear here. I'm not saying that God does not exist, but this film's attempt to prove that God does exist fails on every single level. The logical arguments are so weak as to be almost meaningless, and when those logical arguments fail, the film falls back in the old, you believe, you just don't want to admit it. So, At one point, Josh even argues that it's easy to dismiss what you don't understand or don't want to understand, which is absurd as a logical argument, considering that the existence of God cannot be understood. If it could, people would have no reason to have faith. Faith is a bridge between where a person's understanding ends and the rest of that person's beliefs begin. A person does not and cannot know that God exists, but a person can have faith in their heart that God exists. And before you say I'm making pointless semantic distinctions, let's acknowledge that those distinctions matter in a film that attempts to logically argue for the existence of God. And even if we put the argument aside and say that the real point of the film is a young man standing up for his faith, we do have to acknowledge one small but important detail. He cheats! God's Not Dead is a terrible film all the way around. That's my position, I've explained why, and if my position offends you, that's fine. Get over it. Move on. And don't send me emails that have your IP address attached. Honestly. Amateurs.
Pomegranate.